In Vaetchanan, Moshe repeats the story of the Ten Commandments, repeats the text of the Ten Commandments. But there are some interesting differences between the first version in Shemot in Exodus and this second version, repeated here 40 years later in Devarim. In fact, the differences are minute, but they are significant. There's a whole history of how difficult it is to copy things accurately. In 1631, in England, there was a version of the Bible that was called the Wicked Bible, because it missed out the not, shalt not, and instead said, thou shalt commit adultery, instead of thou shalt not commit adultery. Of course, that Wicked Bible didn't gain much popularity. Here, the nuances are so small. For example, when it comes to Shabbat, in the first version it says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the Shabbat. Here it says, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, to keep the Shabbat. And in fact, as we know, when we sing Lecha Dodi, we say on Friday evenings, Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. Shamor and Zachor, these two words, were given simultaneously. Now, God can say something simultaneously, because God can do anything, but we humans can't say two words simultaneously. One has to come before the other. And therefore, that creates a problem for us, because we say which was the original legitimate one. And in a sense, both were legitimate, because both were part of that original idea that came from God, and then had to be, if you like, distilled or put through a transistor before it turned into human language. So on the one hand, Zachor means to remember the whole idea, how significant and important it is, and we must do that, and it's part of posterity, but at the same time, if we don't actually do it, it's not enough to sit at home and say, oh yes, I remember. We actually have to translate that into actions. Then there's another interesting difference, and the other interesting difference is that in the first version it says, Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, honor your father and your mother in order that you have long life. And in the second version it says, do it kashet sivcha, as God has already commanded you. Well, of course we know He's already commanded you. Why do we have to say this? Unless, of course, here it is there with the purpose of saying this is the second version, and that sometimes you could have different versions, and the core matters of honoring your father and your mother. And then you have another difference, the difference with the letter Vav. In the first version, lo titzach, lo tinaf, v'lo tignov. And when we come here into this one, it says lo titzach, v'lo tinaf, v'lo tignov. And so what's the extra v doing? Is it implying that within these principles there are more subdivisions, like, for example, the division between murder and manslaughter? And then the order of what comes first, your house or your ox or your wife. And sometimes those are, if you like, reversed in priority depending on the situation. In other words, language is a very specific tool. And anybody who thinks you can take language in the Torah literally is making a very big mistake. I don't need to repeat the idea that when the Torah talks about the finger of God, it doesn't mean that He cuts His fingernails, or that when God is angry, that His blood pressure rises, and this is a problem. So much of the language of the Torah is not meant to be taken superficially. And we need to understand what the message behind it really is. And so much of what we find difficult to understand, when you take it from a slightly different point of view, when you understand that language has layers, it removes some of the ambiguity, it also removes some of the harshness. And that's why the oral law is so essential, enabling us to understand the written law.